Bontari. Good afternoon. Welcome to Sincerely Carolina. This is a new show on Sappy Mix Studio, and I will do a small introduction for those of you who don't know me yet. My name is Carolina. I am a health administrator. I work as a health policy advisor, but I like talking about everything. So that's why I have a show. And today we have a guest. I'll let her introduce herself real quickly before we continue. Hi, Kirsten.
Hi, Carolina. My name is Kirsten de Cuba. I'm 19 years old, and I have been living with generalized anxiety disorder since I was a child, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 16. And this year, I'm 19 now, I was diagnosed with PTSD.
Ooh,
Yes.
interesting. This is very interesting. I too have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and OCD. So, yes. So today we're going to talk about dismissive language. But before we go into that, I just want to, why are we talking about mental health? I know this topic may seem redundant to some people and very necessary to others. I hope that those of you who are watching, maybe somewhere in between, we have been reading a lot of posts on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, all platforms really, about reaching out and, hey, I'm here, there for you, just let me know if you need something, if you need help with something. But I have noticed as well that people may not necessarily know how to react to somebody who's trying to reach out. So that's why I think this topic is important. That's why I invited Kirsten too. Kirsten is a Generation Z representative. And oftentimes I hear from the younger crowd that older generations, including millennials, myself, tend to dismiss outcries for help to the point where people feel isolated and eventually they don't get the help they need and turn into, something drastic or even tragic. So, yes, mental health in Aruba in general, this is a concern. We have heard different organizations talking about this, how this is a problem. We don't spend enough money or compared to like the other islands or even the Netherlands in mental health. Mental health in the world has increased as, a problem, especially during COVID, isolation, people being sick, people dying. So it's an important topic, but more importantly is how do we go about it? How do we react? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Kirsten, can you maybe give me an example of reactions that you have had? And then I'll go into, what is okay to say and why it's not okay to say that and how dismissive language really works. But I think people need to know what dismissive language sounds like first.
Yes. Well, a common thing I always hear is comparisons between situations. So as someone that's been living with generalized anxiety disorder and also now has PTSD, I've had people try to help me by comparing my situation to another one. So I would tell certain people like, hey, so I'm struggling with this and that. And that person would say, well, I know this other person, both their parents died in a car crash or their dog ran away, so you have nothing to worry about. And that, it's supposed to make me feel better, but honestly, it makes me feel really bad because I feel like I'm being dramatic and I feel like I'm not allowed to feel what I'm feeling right now. And it also makes me feel bad because nobody should have to go through that.
Thank you so much for that example, Kirsten. So as Kirsten was saying, a lot of the things that we hear is at comparison level where we try to compare somebody's problem to somebody else's problem. And then in that process, although what Kirsten said, the person most of the time is not trying to make the other person feel bad, but they think that by doing this, the other person is going to feel better because the situation may sound worse or more extreme. But in order to understand how this impacts the other person, it's important to understand that for the person who is struggling with anxiety, and like in Kirsten's case, or depression, or any other mental health disorder, what they're going through is the worst. I mean, what they're feeling is like the top, that's their extreme. We don't know what they may feel like, right? In those comparison situations, like if that would happen to them, we have no idea how that would make them feel. But what they are going through now is making them feel at that tipping point. So it's very important to recognize that different people feel different things at different levels. By the way, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and post them in the Facebook comment section. I am trying to read everything that comes up there. But yeah, so dismissive language. It's any time when we undermine or dismiss something because either we don't think it's important enough or because we simply think that it's not serious enough, because our brain creates these little boxes, these little silos of what we believe is extreme or not extreme, bad or not bad. So if we have had experiences that, are very, very terrible, and that's like our benchmark of what's bad and, what's sad, and somebody else comes with something that to us may seem not as extreme or sad, we may think that person is not feeling the same level of sadness. So it's important to know that we as persons, as we go and have different experiences, we create biases. Biases to some extent are healthy because it helps us kind of, make decisions day to day. It's how we make quick 3 seconds decisions, like do I go left, do I go right, because our biases help you decide. But sometimes these same biases may stop us from thinking critically and rationally. So this is what happens with comparison language. We tend to think that what we experience is like, the norm, the benchmark. And it's not. It's just your own reality and what you have experienced. So in dismissive language, we see people saying like what Kirsten was saying, oh, this other event. But we also hear people saying like, oh, I feel like that too sometimes. And sometimes people might be empathetic and they may have experienced a similar feeling. Like if Kirsten is talking to me and we talk about certain symptoms of anxiety, I may say like, oh, I recognize that, right? But the reality is that I may recognize certain feelings, but I don't know exactly what Kirsten is feeling, which is feeling that. So it's really important to understand that and kind of let go of what we know. So that's when we try to compare. But we also tend to be really nice sometimes in our responses. And then, I've heard all kinds of things, but you'll have people who say stuff like, oh, but you're so strong. I don't expect you to feel this way. Kirsten, have you heard something like that?
I have, actually. I've heard, well, you don't look sick, or you look completely normal, but it's not. It's an invisible illness. It's up here, in a way. I mean, it's not all in your head, obviously, but because I've had people tell me, oh, but it's all in your head. Of course it's all in my head because, I have certain chemicals that are not working properly. But the way you imply it, it's like, so it's imaginary,
Exactly. So these are one of the examples. And someone's life may be really great, If we look at examples of celebrities, we tend to look at them and think like, oh, their lives look so amazing, and we don't fully understand what their lives really are like. But they deal with mental illnesses as well. So having, what's considered a good life or like a financially stable life is not, like a rule of thumb that you will be happy always or that you won't suffer from mental illnesses. So that is something that you hear a lot. And I know that most people who say these things, they don't say it from a bad place. But what happens is that as soon as somebody tells you, and my own example is that when somebody tells me, oh, but you always look so happy, or you're busy all the time, you look so strong, like what Kirsten said earlier, it makes you wonder if you are indeed being dramatic, or, am I not being grateful enough about my life and how great things are? Or, oh my gosh, maybe I should not be feeling this way. So this feeling then is wrong, right? For people with anxiety, it's really horrible when you go through these thought processes, because then you start to question your own feelings and then you want to change them because you should be feeling good and you should be feeling happy. And I just want to say that it doesn't mean that we're not happy. we can be happy about everything. But, it's just how we react to little things that may seem insignificant to other people, where, sometimes it gets so bad that it impairs us from functioning in real life. So Kirsten, you just gave a couple of examples of things that people have said to you that, were a little bit frustrating for you on the receiving end. What are things that you have heard from people that you did like?
Well, I have heard, just know that I'm here for you. Is there anything I can do to help? Or I had a friend, usually I'm not a fan of advice, but I had this friend tell me, I think the best thing I can tell you is just listen to your body, because my anxiety has limited me in a lot of things. I would make plans with someone, but then I would have to cancel because my body is just being very tense, and, I don't want to make a scene in public either, so I would, just cancel plans. And my friend, she was being very understanding. She was like, well, Kirsten, just listen to your body, And it was so nice to hear, because you always hear that, people always say that towards people with physical illnesses. You never hear that. You never hear that being said to someone with mental illness. So that was really nice to hear.
Indeed. You mentioned something very interesting, right? How we perceive mental illness and how we perceive physical illness. So, it's common here when somebody says like they have the flu or, the common cold, and then somebody would say, listen to your body. Some people would suggest stuff, like, oh, drink this and that, sweat it out. I do not advise this. This is not how your body works, but but these are things that, we are so programmed to understand how physical illness works and how we respond to that, where we give most of the time useful advice, because we know what useful advice looks like. We know what works, what hasn't worked, right? But we don't have these set of tools for mental illnesses. So when it comes to mental illnesses, what Kirsten said, somebody just maybe not even understanding, but telling you to listen to your body and just do whatever you need to do is a good thing to say. Asking somebody if they need help, like, do you need help with anything? Do you know how to reach out to professionals? So most of the time, we may not have the right answers. We may not know what to say, especially in a moment of crisis. And it's also important to recognize what you're able to do or not, how you can help somebody, and to the extent that you can help somebody, and just offering to help them seek for that professional help. So, ask them if they have spoken to a professional or not. If they say yes, then, just check in. How's that going? If somebody says no, then, you can continue with questioning and ask why they haven't reached out to professional help. And you might learn some interesting things there. Somebody might not have reached out because they, financially can't do this, or because they don't know how to reach out for professional help, who to go to. Here in Aruba, what I hear a lot is that people say it takes so long before you get help that they just kind of give up. And, yes, it takes long. We have heard different news, even from Respaldo, where they, they're crying for help, like, we need more help, and this is what you can expect. But if you don't start the process, then, you're never going to get there. So, one of the best advices you can tell them is start, by requesting the letter, and just go on the waiting list, and we'll see what we can do in the meantime. So just trying to be like that glue that helps the person reach out to the professional help, or to the help that they need. But yes, so now I want to ask Kirsten some, honest questions, and I'm not sure what the demographics are of the people who are listening right now, and I hope that you will feel offended, but that you learn something from this. But I am genuinely interested from a Gen Z. I have personally experienced when I was a little bit younger that people will say things like, "Oh, you don't know what stress is." And you don't know what hardship is because you don't pay for mortgage yet, or now that I'm a little bit older and I have bills to pay and I have work and dogs to take care of and a husband to keep in check with, it's only gotten worse. my anxiety does not get any better, but you just learn to cope in different points in life. But what are things that you have heard maybe from like teachers or other adults around you? What are things that you would want them to hear and know and understand for how they react with others in the future?
It doesn't hurt to express empathy. You don't have to understand to understand. Unless you have not experienced it yourself, you're never going to understand what it's like to live with a mental illness. But again, it doesn't hurt to express empathy, and don't try to minimize our struggling by saying, oh, it only gets worse, or you don't know what stress is. I know it only but yes, these are one of the many things that I like to hear.
All right. I know that teachers in Aruba here struggle with a lot of things. And, I've heard this from teachers too. Every time when the school year starts, they get about 25 to 30 students. And that means 25 to 30 families, with their own issues and their own problems. But it's the same when we go to work, right? When you go to work, you have your colleagues that you deal with. These are all different people with their own baggage, their own family, their own situations. So kind of being aware to what are things that people may say when they are trying to reach out for help. A lot of us don't even, and it takes time, because my way of reaching out or my way of trying to express an emotion may seem very different from somebody else's. But, what are the things that we look out for when somebody may be expressing that they're going through a very hard situation or something very hurtful? And just, what Kirsten said, how we react to that in that moment. But we have to understand that, people like teachers or just one person can't do it all. But, just empathizing. I think that teachers deserve a lot of support in this process, because I know, by the way, if you guys don't know me from Fundação Autismo Aruba, I am also the president. So I get to hear a lot from teachers. And what I realize is that they don't even, receive the proper support to be able to understand what's going on. Sometimes it's hard for them to process certain situations. They don't even understand because, if you come from a background where you didn't have to deal with certain traumas or certain, bad socioeconomic situations, it may be hard for you to understand why some children are going through things and parents are going through things. Kirsten, do you have any tips for, like your peers on how to start a conversation in a way that might not, I know it's hard to ask of somebody not to make it overwhelming or like sad or too intense, but are there tips of what you have experienced too reaching out for help that have been, more successful or more effective?
Well, it has been pretty hard for me to reach out. I actually, I got help because they noticed strange behaviors. But honestly, just be honest, and yeah. But yeah, it was pretty hard for me to reach out, but just be honest, talk to someone you trust, an adult or a peer or anyone. It could be a teacher or a social worker. I know it's very scary and you might feel embarrassed. I was very embarrassed, and that's why I tried to hide my disorder for like a month until people started noticing, and that's when I reached out. But yeah, these are the things that, just talk to someone you trust. And again, it's scary and you might feel humiliated or ashamed, but trust me, once you get that off your chest, it's like you're a step further,
So we have a question in the comment section, and I would like for you to answer it, and I'm going to answer it too if I have, a different experience. But we have a question from Emil Thiel. I wonder who he is. But he's asking, how do you recognize that you may have anxiety or that you may be struggling with anxiety?
Well, I noticed that I have my way of thinking is a lot different from a lot of people my age. I have a lot of irrational fears, and sometimes my body reacts really badly towards those irrational fears. I would start to hyperventilate. I would start to shake. I would feel like I'm getting a heart attack because I would get like this pain like in this arm, on my chest, and the biggest symptom I ever had to deal with is derealization, and that's the feeling of you feel like everything is unreal. You feel like you're in a dream, and that's just your brain's way of coping with I'm gonna say dangerous situation.
That's a very interesting perspective. And yes, I mean, I have been struggling from anxiety for a very long time too, since I was a child. And, my parents kind of noticed that, a little bit differences. I would get like irritable as a child, but now as an adult that I know myself better and understand my body better and reactions, right, to certain emotions and feelings better, I too have like those feelings where your tummy feels like in a knot. Sometimes it really hurts, right? So, anytime that your body is reacting physically to something that has, no other explanation, especially if it's followed by like these thoughts. So like what Kirsten was saying, maybe for people her age or for people in general, really, it's having these catastrophic feelings that if you don't complete this thing or you don't do this thing, like the worst is gonna happen, and then feeling the need to fulfill it and just doing it. So I'm kind of, I'm the person that I will sit on a task for a very long time, and I will go back and read my sentences again, right? And check for punctuation and commas and all these things. I will go and change my words. Like I will search for synonyms because I feel like if I don't use like the right word in this sentence, then, people are going to understand this differently. And if they don't get it, then they're gonna, so I start making up scenarios that haven't even happened and that I oftentimes have absolutely no reason to think that will happen. And what Kirsten said, like I have gotten full-blown panic attacks. I ended up in a hospital because I thought I was having a heart attack. So that's very scary to kind of have those feelings. But if any of you who are watching have had different feelings, different experiences, please feel free to share. But basically, like those physiological feelings of anxiety, because if we don't know what other person are thinking. So for the longest time, I thought that some of my OCD thoughts were maybe how other people think about certain things too. Like I had no idea that those things, so where do you know that your thoughts are so different from somebody else? And that's where the physiological symptoms are so important to recognize, that feeling of like the trembling, even when it's like, it's not cold and, you start to tremble, but it comes from like with a sense of like fear, right? What Kirsten was saying, that sense of like danger. For women, the symptoms for a heart attack are not like where your arm hurts and stuff, but a lot of people, have these symptoms in their head of heart attack, which are male symptoms for heart attacks. And then those are actually, symptoms of panic attacks for women. And it's very scary because then you panic even more. You think you're going to die, and it's like, why am I having this? I'm a healthy person, or I do sports and I have absolutely no reason to be here. Like, why is this happening? But in my case, like, your immune system goes down. You start realizing that you get sicker often. So these are all signs of your body, working against itself a little bit. So yes, it's important that you recognize how your thoughts are impacting your body's behavior, like your physiological behavior, especially if there's no other reason for these physiological symptoms. So I hope we answered your question, Emil. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask them. But yes, so I was listening to some statistics. I love statistics. And I will be sharing some of this on my social media platforms as well. Like doing this, I like sharing information that I learn. But I was reading about Aruba situation a little bit, or like listening to different news and stuff. And we have in Aruba like one of the highest numbers. I think it's the second one in the world of divorce. So I know that for younger children or even teenagers or even adults. I mean, even as an adult, I can't think of how this impacts people going through it or the children of the family members of. But yet people don't really like talk about it. It's one of the things that I hear the most when a child or even a teenager or somebody talks about divorce. They're like, oh, but so many people get a divorce, which is very problematic in itself. But that kind of way that we have normalized certain behaviors, stuff like that. Like, I mean, it is very high in Aruba. So indeed, a lot of people in Aruba have gone through it, but it's not okay. It still isn't normal. So on our statistic, it's like for anxiety, about 1 in 3 people struggle with this disorder. It's the mental health disorder that affects the most people, and it is also the most debilitating one. So it's very important to note that. Yet, you may be even talking to somebody who has it, and people are still like, oh, it's okay. And I was going over these statistics, and I was like, what about our Aruban culture? What do we perceive as somebody who's strong, somebody who's, respected? And I have noticed that we tend to glorify overwork. We tend to glorify when people are very busy and stressed out because that somehow relates to success, right? When you're doing a bunch of things. And for some people it is, but for some other people it's not. And I think it's important to recognize how these biases affect us. So just because something has become normalized doesn't mean that it's okay. So stuff like divorce, it's still something serious that happens to families. Yes, anxiety is very common. It's still something you need to work on. And we don't have to ignore it because our culture tells us that if you push through it, you're strong or you're okay. Kirsten, I don't know if you may have experienced these stuff. I mean, I'm on social media a lot, but I feel like I'm still of the generation where we don't necessarily feel like we have to do as much comparison. And I may be speaking for myself. I don't know how other people about my generation feels, but compared to other younger people, like how has social media, affected you in Aruba or in general? Like, I don't know, what crowd you follow, but
affected me as in, can you explain a bit further?
So I have noticed that everything has pros and cons, right? I've noticed there is a lot more awareness in your generation. Like when I see feed from your generation about mental health, it's completely different. So my generation tends to post a lot about like, what they consider success and things that they have done, but they have like reached a milestone, which for people like me kind of creates like a little bit of pressure. But I have learned that I have my own timing and my own process, and I will get to it when I get to it. But in your generation, I have noticed a lot of people sharing more personal things, situations that in my case have been a little bit inspiring. It helps me feel okay about talking about certain things. But I also feel like it may be creating a pressure for you to talk about things that you may not be ready to talk about. So I just want to know how this feels for you.
Well, first of all, I'm actually glad that my generation were being more open about our mental health struggles, because if someone can talk about their physical illness without being judged, without being called attention seeker, then we should be able to talk about mental illness without being called those things. However, I made a post a while ago after the ordeal with the guy that, died by suicide. And I made a post talking about my own experience with, generalized anxiety disorder, PTSD, depression, and, even suicidal thoughts. And I got a lot of reaction, more than I expected. However, I found myself being forced in a way to explain to certain people how it feels like, how PTSD feels like, and it has kind of triggered me, and I actually got a setback about 2 weeks ago. So it might have been too soon for me, but I am still very happy that, I was able to tell that story, and that more people my age, maybe even younger, were able to tell their story, because it makes me feel like I'm not alone. And so I feel like, in a way, it still made a positive impact on me and some other people.
I think you mentioned a very important point where the question, right? So I have decided, I want to say like in the last maybe year, to open up a little bit more about my condition, even to like close friends, friends that I've had for a very, very long time. I had, serious conversation with them, and that helped them understand me better and why I react certain way to certain situations and stuff. But I realized that once you open up, it means that people might have questions. And sometimes we don't even know where our boundary is of those questions. Like, how much am I really willing to share? And I think an advice that I have for people who do want to share, their conditions with others, especially if you want to do it for like a teaching moment, try to think for yourself before, how much am I willing to share and how far am I willing to go, so that you have those boundaries set for yourself and that you're able to set them clearly for others as well. Let them know if you want questions, are you okay with questions or not? How many questions are you okay with? But in that same sense, I have noticed that some of like the older generation, I don't want to say all, but some older generations have counter reacted. I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but they have responded on social media with very interesting like memes and things that have made me feel a little bit awkward. And it might be because I have a very diverse social media platform, in the sense that I have people from all ages and all age groups and backgrounds, But I have noticed that people tend to react, either way. So when, the situation happened with this young man, I saw all kinds of things, and, for a couple of days it was good. Like, it was like people are like open, and it's like, oh my gosh, we need to talk about this and stuff. But then the older generation started posting, or maybe I just started noticing it. That could be it too. But I started seeing these things where like, oh, back in my day, we didn't have these things. And that made me think a little bit, And I love talking to my parents. If you know me, you know this. I spend a lot of time with my parents. I visit them almost every day. So I have these conversations with them too. And I got some of these responses too. So I was like, So it's a thing, right? But for a very long time, we didn't perceive reaching out and talking about personal things as strength. We perceived it as weakness, right? Especially for their generation. And how we educated and treated children or younger adults and their issues was different. So I even started seeing some posts where they're like, oh, in my time, my mom would just like snap it out of me. That snapping out of it, I hate that sentence. But yes, so parents or teachers who are from that generation where you were, this was the response to you expressing yourself. First of all, I want to say I'm sorry that you had to go through this. But second of all, I want to say that just because that was your experience doesn't mean that you have to carry it on and continue this trend, right? I mean, if somebody reaches out to you, if it's your child or somebody you know, try to listen and be compassionate. Try to think of how you felt at that moment. So I started noticing that. And then after all of these things, right, these things happen, then I started seeing some younger generation kind of switching to that mentality as well. Because where's the line of, oh my gosh, I feel for you, and okay, this is too much, right? So I started seeing where people are calling other people like dramatic, what you were saying, attention seeker. And I'm just thinking like, why? What triggers people to consider somebody else's emotions and feelings, especially if they're expressing like their own personal situation, like Kirsten was saying. What makes you think that it has to be justified to you, whomever you may be? And why does it have to be questioned so much? But then, you know, I guess it has to do with the fact that we have never been as open as we have right now, right? And social media is great for that. Social media also creates other issues, but social media is great for that. And I think that we should be a little bit more cautious about what we put out there, what we respond to people, because it can affect somebody. Like Kirsten mentioned, you know, like that for her was a very positive moment, but at the same time, it made her feel like, oh, maybe it was too soon. So I just want us all to think about how have we been reacting to people who reach out to us, and how have we been reacting in general on social media? Like, what do we post? What do we choose to share? And is this helpful in any way, or is it gonna, you know, make somebody feel bad about their situation? Kirsten. So if you were to explain Aruba's response to mental health in general, and I'm going to ask you, which is really hard, to try not to take into account like these, I want to say last 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks since the happening, because, you know, that creates like a, yeah, I don't want to call it like a, but a spike in empathy that doesn't last, sadly, right? How would you think, and, you know, I'll say how I feel Aruba is, because our generations are different, but how do you think Aruba is doing on mental health? Like, do you feel like we're in a good place? Do you feel like, you know, you feel heard?
Well, generally, I don't feel heard. I don't feel like my emotions are valid, and it took me a whole month after the traumatic experience for me to even reach out to my parents. I didn't reach out, they just reached out to me because they noticed weird behaviors. But I was just so humiliated because, you know, it's just mental illness is just so stigmatized in our culture. You know, people are always saying, "Well, I'm here for you. If you need to talk, I'm here." But when you're in need of someone, you get called dramatic, attention seeker. So I was really happy to see people, you know, reaching out on social media platforms the last 3 weeks, but I noticed that it has declined again. And that's what really disappoints me. And something I noticed as well, I was actually on TikTok this week, and you know, I've been looking at dancing videos made by Arubans, and I would look at the comments, and I saw a lot of mean things being said towards a certain girl, and I'm like, weren't you guys mental health advocates like 2 weeks ago? What happened? I just feel like, I don't know how to say it, but you know, in Aruba, I read a quote a while ago. You know, we stigmatize mental health, but we mourn suicide. So I feel like nobody reacts until something happens. And then for like 2-3 weeks after it happens, everyone's like, "Oh, I'm here for you. You know, you're not alone." But then after a while, people forget that event, and then they just go back to being themselves.
Do you think that it's different if you're like a girl or a boy? And I'm going somewhere with this, but I just want to know how you feel. Like, do you feel like it differs if you're like a woman or a man? Like, does it maybe like even in your own experience, but also what you may have experienced of somebody else?
As in when I'm trying to reach out? Well, yes and no. The thing is, like generally girls are known to be dramatic. So I feel like when girls try to reach out, you know, they get called all these mean things. However, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen with guys, it happens with guys. I mean, you know, the young man that, you know, died by suicide, he tried to reach out, and apparently he also received a lot of backlash when he tried to open up about his depression. However, guys are not known to be emotional, or, you know, so when they reach out, I feel like in a way they could be taken a bit more seriously. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to add, we do live in a culture though that men are supposed to, you know, they're not allowed to shed a tear, they're not allowed to show emotions, they're not allowed to struggle, so we have to also take that into account.
Indeed. And this is something that I have seen too. It's like, it's either you're on one side of the spectrum, right? So if you're a woman or a young girl, and you reach out because you're feeling certain feelings, then it may be perceived as being a little bit over dramatic, or you being too expressive of your emotions, which may be considered like normal emotions, but what is normal? And with boys or men, we tell them that, you know, it's not okay. Like, why are you feeling like that? Like, you shouldn't be emotional. You should man up. Why are you crying? Why are you so concerned about this person? You should just let them go and move on. And sadly, we have seen how this has impacted Aruba's responses to a lot of behaviors. So, yes, Aruba has a lot of great things, but we have a lot of social issues. So, we see that, domestic abuse or, relational violence is very high. And there is a correlation, a very clear one, as a matter of fact, with how we, internalize certain problems, because if you don't have an outlet, so in the case of boys from a very young age, if they're not able to express themselves, they tend to internalize that sadness or that anger, and it converts into external anger, right? Aggression. And with girls, it's on the other way. So even when we start to feel like this is not okay, like this is a little bit too much, that feeling is justified by a device between genders. So like, oh, if this little boy is being a little bit mean to you, you should, maybe he doesn't know how to communicate with you. He likes you. He doesn't know how to do it. And then we kind of grow with this. And, the reality is that especially for girls, mental health illnesses, their onset starts in high school. Because that's when they start to question, like, is this behavior really normal? Is the way that I'm feeling normal? But especially when you're a teenager, like if you express certain emotions, then it can be taken as you being too much. So it's kind of serious, And when we go back to this young man, John, I was reading. I think a lot of people were reading through his post. And he had a very interesting post where he talked about parenting and how he perceived good parenting. And what he said, he was talking about dads. And some men in the comment section, their masculinity was threatened. So they replied and they said some really mean things like, you should man up. And why are you so concerned about what our dads do or don't do? And I was thinking, and I'm like, this is a form of dismissive language. You're ridiculing somebody, for something that they're saying and they're expressing. We now know that in, his particular case, he was struggling with some feelings towards his parents. And maybe this was a way of reaching out. He was trying to understand certain behaviors and why dads behave a certain way and act a certain way. And then we tend to be defensive, especially if you feel like somebody is criticizing your own behavior, and we just dismiss somebody else for what they're going through. And I think it's very important that we follow the 5-second rule. If you are listening to somebody, even if you cannot relate, or even if you feel offended in any way, think for 5 seconds, like, first of all, is this about me? Is this person talking about me? Yes or no? If they're not talking about you, so it's not about you. Why is this person talking about this? Why is this important? Yes or no? And I don't think we do that enough because, again, our culture has taught us to be very individuals and, just focus on yourself, be self-centered, and don't worry about other people. Focus on yourself and, grow yourself. Being a little bit selfish is part of our culture too. So we tend to make everything about ourselves, and that can be very dangerous and dismissive towards somebody else who's trying to reach out. So I see a card, and it says, nice to see more talks about mental health on the island. It is, in my experience, a large hidden problem. What has helped me a lot is Mark Freeman. He has a great YouTube channel where he explains, gives tips on how to cope with thoughts and fears. Cheers, keep it up. Yes, there's so much out there. There are so many resources. And thank you, Armando, for commenting this, because I don't know about his resources, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know about his resources. And, you just shared it with us. But it's good to know. When somebody reaches out, then you can tell them, Mark Freeman has a bunch of resources that we can use. So, Kirsten, before we start closing up, I just want you, to give you some space if you want to share a little bit more about your experience and what has truly helped you move on. And what I really wanted to do today, and I hope that people got this from today, is to understand that mental health affects everybody. And we talk a lot to adults and older people because, again, in our culture, we tend to value their comments and their opinions and advice more. But I have learned that just going back to the younger generation, just going back to where you may not have been influenced as much as the older generation by our culture and our biases, you kind of go back to the core. So thank you for accepting, but I want to give you that space to share a little bit about your experience and what you would want other people to do to, reach out for help for themselves.
Well, I have been living with generalized anxiety disorder since I was a child. I do not remember the onset of it, but it's just something I've always had. And it got worse this year. It kind of turned into PTSD this year. So I'm going to talk about what I did so far. It was really embarrassing for me to reach out for help. I was scared of psychologists judging me. I was even afraid of that. So for a month straight, I hid everything from my parents. My parents were the first ones to find out. And the best thing I did for me was actually reaching out. But I got the help of my parents to reach out. Because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have done anything. But yes, I know it can be very scary and embarrassing, but if you have at least one person you trust in your life, please reach out, because that was the first step into my recovery. Another thing that has helped me a lot is engaging in activities. I know it's very hard. I have days where I just can't get out of bed because I'm just so scared of the world. But take it easy, but push yourself sometimes, Sometimes I push myself to do art, whether it's painting, drawing, or I like to do a lot of digital art. And sometimes when I start painting, I get so lost in my art that I kind of forget about it for a while. Obviously, it comes back when I stop, but I don't feel as bad as I did before. I run, I work out, I play the piano, I play on my guitar. I love writing. I write a lot of poetry. These are poetry is like a way of expressing all my emotions, and it really helps me calm down. So these are just some things that I do that help me, and I know it's not easy. I really have days where I'm just so tired of battling this illness where I can't get out of bed, or I'm just so scared of getting out of bed because there's triggers everywhere. And on those days where you feel like that, don't be hard on yourself. I made the mistake of being hard on myself. I would punish myself for not being able to do the things that I do. But I recently learned to just accept it for what it is. And tomorrow's a new day. You try tomorrow again. And even if tomorrow doesn't work out, there's tomorrow. But just never give up. And I was on the edge of giving up as well, but it was sometimes I get really emotional talking about this because it's really something I wouldn't wish on, not even my worst enemy. But yes, just take it easy, celebrate the small milestones, even if it's just being able to brush your teeth. I do that, I sometimes I get out of bed and then I brush my teeth and I'm like, whoa, I just brushed my teeth. Let me go text my mom, hey mom, I got to brush my teeth, and she'll be so happy for me, like, yay, you did it, these are the things that have helped me.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Kirsten. And we could all hear it in your voice, and it's okay because it's a very vulnerable thing to share. But I really want for those of us who are listening, including myself, to just when you're on the receiving end, to try to be aware and just listen first. I think that's a hard thing for a lot of us to do. Just listen. Don't try to rationalize or justify a certain feeling or emotion. But focus on what they're saying. What is the thing that they're saying? Like in your case, right? If they're celebrating something small, like brushing their teeth, celebrate that. Listen and don't make it seem insignificant or small. And just try to think about how we respond. Again, some don'ts and do's. Don't say things like snap out of it, or some people have it worse, or, some people are dying of hunger. Some people don't have roof over their heads. Trust me, we know. Like, people know. But it doesn't make what they're feeling any less. So what are things that we can say instead? Hey, I'm listening. Is there any way that I can help you? Is there any way that I can help you? Look for somebody who can help you professionally. Do you just want to talk about it, or what do you want me to do with this information? Because a lot of times, like, I ask that all the time. It's like, I don't mind listening, but I need you at the end to kind of tell me, what do you want me to do with that information? And somebody might just need that outlet for a little bit, but some people might want you to give them advice. And if you're not in a place to give advice that might be helpful, tell the other person. Just be honest. Like, that building that trust, being that trustworthy person in somebody's life, means that you have to be vulnerable and honest too. Let them know how far you can help them. Let them know to what extent you can help them reach for that help. And we have a really good question here. And it's, what does dismissive language looks like at work, right? And who should be held accountable for that? And I may not have an answer for that last question, but maybe I come up with it as we go. So at the work, like I was telling Kirsten, right? Teachers, or even when you're in a classroom with your classmates, everybody has their own perspective on life, on things, and how they feel things and go about things. So at work, dismissive language can look like somebody sharing, again, some, small joy about their children. You'll have people whose children do not sleep the whole night. This is something that happens. So if you have a colleague who has a small child at home and they come to work and they say, I'm so happy my child slept the whole night. They're expressing a win because this has been heavy on them before. So celebrate it with them. Don't tell them like, oh my gosh, she or he still doesn't sleep all night. This is horrible because it makes people question if how they're feeling about something is right or wrong, or if it's justifiable or not. Another example is when somebody says something that's offensive and you tell them, I would appreciate if you don't say stuff like that, or you should think about how you talk about women or men in general, or about other people. And then somebody says something like, you're too sensitive, or or why do you care so much? This is forms of dismissive language on a personal level that we have to be very aware of, because when you're in an environment where you have to see each other 40 hours a week, you kind of want to have a certain level of respect with each other, because if not, if these things keep happening, your workplace where you spend like most of your time becomes a trigger. So this is very serious for people in the workplace. We have a lot of people in Aruba in that age group who are in the working age, who are battling with these things. So it's very important for you to see that. Other things that I have heard here in Aruba, and I hear them way too much, is that people criticize each other for how they feel about their work. So I'm going to say a word in Papiamento, and then I'm going to translate it to English. But one of the words that I hear from other people that said a lot at work is calling your colleague an ass licker. So like chupador. Like, It happens so much. But why? At the same time, one, it's offensive to the other person, especially if that person is expressing happiness for accomplishing something. But at the same time, anytime that I hear this from someone, and not even said to me directly, but even when I hear somebody else say it to somebody else, I wonder, where is that person coming from? Where's that sense of, insecurity coming from, that somebody else expressing a joy for completing a task or, being gratified for a task makes you feel like you should call them that. And this happens often. So, this is a form of being dismissive, but also it's, an outcry for help. So what I would recommend people to do in that situation, ask them why. Why do you think that way? Like, what makes you think that, somebody achieving something, especially if it's their job, right? Because you are there to do your job. Why does that make you feel that way? And just try to listen, and somebody might become very defensive, but then who's responsible for that kind of culture at work? There are different point of views on this, but usually, your workplace culture is either tolerated or accepted by management. So I don't want to say that management is responsible always for the behaviors of their employees, but management should be aware of what the culture is like. If, some form of dismissive language is happening, why it's happening, right? Talk to them. As a manager, ideally, you have people skills too, and you care about your employees, and you want to have them be happy, or at least in a good state so they can perform better. But yes, I don't know if somebody else has any examples of this, but this is like the most common word in a Aruban workplace. And I think it stems for a little bit from insecurity, but also because we perceive management as like the enemy, and we kind of think that your bosses are there to like ruin your life, and pop culture has only increased this even more. But try to think about that. But other things as well, that you can see at work is when somebody says, even if they're, not feeling well, and not feeling well either if it's mentally or physically. Somebody else is like, oh yeah, I had the flu last month and I came in with a fever. And I always tell people, like, I don't know, why are you so proud of this? You're not listening to your body. So this is another form of dismissive language when somebody, uses their standard of how you should behave and when you should show up and not show up to justify or put on expectations on you. And this can be very dangerous, like especially if people feel like they should be forced to come to work even if they're not feeling well. What do you want? You want people to be there and be their best selves and, produce what you need them to produce at an efficient level? Or do you want people to continue to come and just continue to deteriorate for the sake of showing up, right? So these are forms of dismissive language at work. And I think there are many other examples, but it really depends on the workplace and what kind of culture exists. Some workplace, people share a lot more personal stuff, and in some workplaces, people are more distant. But yes, other things are saying, oh, when I was your age, I used to do this and that. That's dismissive too. Or even the other way around, when we refer to the older generation as dinosaurs or older people. So anyways, mental health is a very broad subject, but I hope that we learned a little bit about this, how we respond. I will post some quick do's and don'ts, but what I really want us to be aware is that take 5 seconds before you respond to somebody who's sharing an emotion or a feeling, a concern. Remember, it's not about you, it's about them. They're expressing something that they're feeling. They feel like they can share this with you. Appreciate that. Be grateful that you are that trusted person in that person's life. That's not a given. You don't have to be, even if you're a parent, right? Kristen and I count on our parents, but not everybody can. So be grateful for being that person in somebody else's life. This is sincerely Carolina. I hope that you learned a little bit about this. I hope that you opened your heart and mind to the younger generation because they are our future. So we do want them to be happy. But yes, I hope that you tune in next week. Next week, we will have Mr. Chong, Edward Chong, to talk about education and the diversification of that, thinking about different careers, thinking outside the box, and just how we shape the younger minds and how we can help shape those younger minds. But yes, I also want to remind you about the other shows that we have on Sappy Mix Studio. By the way, I want to say I'm really happy about this. I like this. Thank you so much, Jeff. But yes, so I see that we have Tech Impact. Oh, we have Política da Cruel today. We also have Florintech, Ejecuta. Oh my gosh, Jeff, this writing. On Unfuckable Wit. Did I say it right? Yes, okay. Pillow Talk, Sappy Mix, Raw, and I hope that's it. And my show, Sincerely Carolina. So thank you so much. Thank you for this platform. Thank you for listening. I hope that you share this so that other people can listen to this. Watch the other shows as well. This is a very diverse platform. Everybody talks about everything. So it's an educational one too. Kirsten, is there anything else that you want to say before we leave?
Well, thank you for listening and for asking questions. And thank you for having me on your show. And thank you for giving us younger generations a chance to be heard.
No, thank you for being willing to share. And also for those of you wondering, because I think all the other shows on Sappy Mix are in Papiamento, why? Sincerely Carolina is in English, so we actually have an international audience. So I really want to keep it in English so that those of you who are watching from the Netherlands and those of you who are watching from the US, from Colombia, and from everywhere else can understand what I'm saying and that you get to learn too. These are not issues that are only for Aruba, but for the world. Once again, this is Sincerely Carolina, and I hope you learned something and you put it into practice next time somebody reaches out to you. Thank you so, so much.